Ramon Gaskin, and I to welcome you to this press conference
It is plain talk.
on the Amaila Falls hydroelectricity project. The invitation stated the purpose of the press conference is to address information currently available and examine whether and how that information supports some of the statements emanating from the government and other persons. The opportunity will also be taken by us this afternoon to raise specific and direct questions to the government on critical areas surrounding the project and to make suggestions on a way forward. We want to take this opportunity not only to provide some substance and raise pertinent questions, but to appeal to the government and its spokespersons to lower the temperature of invective and irrationality in their response to legitimate concerns by legislators and citizens of this country. We sent out yesterday invitations to the press, and we thank you for coming. Special invitees such as the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, the Ghana Manufacturers Association, Kit Nascimento in his personal capacity, Ramesh Duku, Ronald Webster, offered to the Prime Minister, Public Utilities Commission, the Trade Union Congress, FITUG, Public Service Union, all these bodies that have been making statements on the basis of what we honestly believe is inadequate information, because we ourselves do not have the relevant information. We've got a few draft documents, but critical documents are missing. We've invited the Chinese Embassy, the British High Commission, the European Union, the US Embassy, and the Canadian High Commission to send representatives. Of course, we invited as well the political parties. The format we will take is Ramon Gaskin will do an initial presentation. I will then rejoin, and then we'll have questions. So before I explain, I invite Ramon, I should tell you the background for all of our work is a document called Amaila Falls Project. I think this is a document circulated by the government. Very strangely enough, it has basic accounting errors in it and a very few pages. We've also used the Hydroelectric Act. I think it's called Hydropower Electric Act, which ought to be the governing legislation. Of course, we've used the Constitution, the Procurement Act, and other relevant legislation. So against that background, I'm going to ask Ramon Gaskin if he could begin to make some presentations.
Yes, thanks. Thank you. Now, I've had an interest in this thing for a long time, ever since Motilal came down here and said he was building a road. As a matter of fact, I did take Motilal to court. I lost that case. That Motilal Road, I call it, that was a contract granted to Motilal by NISIL. Now, anytime NISIL gives a contract to a contractor to build a road for the thing, you know there has to be a problem there. But we lost the case at the first thing, and when we appealed it to the full court, we didn't get it heard. At the end, I had to abandon it. So from the very first beginning, I had problems with this thing. I want to turn around this document so we could see it properly, and you can photograph it up. You had it upside down, I think. This document we've used a lot. This is the only document we know that has been circulated to a few people. We were able to get a copy of it, and we have looked at it very carefully. to be undertaken in this country, if it should go through, at 840 million US capital cost. And for that, there's been no bidding, no international tendering or nothing. I see in the papers there's bidding to buy some van or minibus for some ministry, but there's no bidding for this thing here. 840 million US. So that is the first problem we have with it. And I believe it is because of that. It comes in at this price, at 840 million US capital cost for 165 megawatts of power. It is our view, and based on it, we know that 165 megawatts of power ought to come in the range of 350 to 400 million US. And Cited Global itself had confirmed that in a letter they've written to the press in response to a letter I had written. So we have a problem here at the beginning. The government keeps saying that this thing is going to be cheap and reliable. We're going to deal with this today essentially. The main reasons why the government said this thing should go forward, because it's going to be cheap and reliable. So we start with this whole question of cheapness. This is the most expensive thing, the most expensive hydro ever. If you take the hydro that even the Saiti people built in Uganda, the Bujugali, 250 megawatts at 900 million US, coming in at 3.6 million US per megawatt hour. This Guyana hydro is over 40% more expensive than the Saiti thing they built in Africa. So this is the first problem. Anytime you put on a project for 165 million US for 840 capital million US, it has to be expensive, and you have a problem with tariffs necessarily arising out of that. But it's not just 840 million, you know. The government does not want to tell you, they've never told you how much this thing is really going to cost. This thing is going to cost 2.4 billion US with a B. With a B. Over 20 years. And why it's going to cost 2.4 billion US with a B? It's because we have to pay the Chinese an extraordinarily high rate of interest. The Exim Bank, who's supposed to be financing some of this thing, and Cited Global, they're looking for 19% guaranteed rate of return on their investment, tax-free. So it's not just 840 million US, it's another 1,400 million US thereabouts. And I'm excluding the IDB interest if it should ever come through, and I'm excluding interest paid on the Guyana government equity portion of this thing. So let's get that clear to begin with. This thing ain't coming in cheap. And because it's coming in at 2.4 billion, we have a lot of problems with cheapness and tariffs. I want to say something about tariffs. A lot of people believe that in this country, tariffs are set by the PUC. It is not true. The PUC in this country does not set tariffs at all. The power of the PUC to set tariffs was removed. In the PUC Act of 99, as amended, the new Section 33 removes the power of the PUC to set tariffs in this country. Tariffs are set by the GPL itself, alone, pursuant to its license and the formula that is in the license there. That is where you get tariffs from. It has nothing to do with PUC. I think the calculations are submitted to them, and they do some arithmetical checking of the thing. Tariffs are not done in this country by PUC, and in this project documents here, that has been reconfirmed. As a matter of fact, it says very clearly that the GPL shall adjust tariffs annually in order to accommodate the costs associated with this project. GPL will be buying power, we understand, it is planned. The draft power purchase agreement is here, from Amaila Hydro at 110 million US per annum. Increasing annually for the first 12 years by 1.75%. coming from year 13, declining to 71 million to year 20. You add up all of that, for those of you who know maths, I did a lot of maths myself, over 2.4 billion US, excluding other costs associated with this deal. This thing ain't coming in cheap. It is not true that as a result of all of this investment, you will get cheap electricity. Right now, the GPL is spending about 24 billion US in 24 billion Guyana dollars in fuel for its production. 24 billion Guyana dollars. Annually. The last available financial statement. Of this 24 billion, you have to understand that 31% of all of this production that they do down there isn't being billed to anybody. That's what you call system losses. 31%. That's about 7.5 billion Guyana dollars down the drain right there. If we were able to deal with that problem, which the GPL has not been able to deal with for quite a long time, I would say even since my time, over 18, 20 years ago, since the CDC people came here, and for the last 10, 15 years, since 97, when they left here, when CDC left here, I don't know, they're still at 31. The problem at the GEPL essentially is their inefficiency. And that inefficiency is a function of tariffs. That's why you pay so high tariffs in this country. But if you take 110 million US at the current rate today, I think it's about 2.8 now and climbing, the economists will tell you, it's the same cost. It's the same 20-something billion Guyana dollars. So you're not seeing, for those of us who know little accountancy, bookkeeping and arithmetic, you're not seeing it. If the government will show us the calculations, we'll be happy to look at it. This project will not lead to a reduction in tariffs, and in all probability, I would bet, I'm not a betting man, but I would bet the rates will have to go up when this thing starts. As a matter of fact, there's something here with the published called financial commitments in this document. And it says here, in their projections, that in 2016, which is the first year this thing is supposed to be working, that GPL would suffer a cash shortfall of 9.4 million US. 9.4 million US, coming back to the Treasury for money again. This is the year that this so-called hydro starts. And they tell you straight, 2016 they come back again for subsidies. In their own words, in their own projections, their own numbers, 9.4 million US, 2016 they will need. And that is the year of the hydro. So that is the problem. This thing is far too expensive, and I said earlier, I do believe that is a function of the failure, the refusal of the government to go to international bidding for this thing. And because of this failure and this very expensive project, the rates will have to go up. There is no PUC involved in this thing. But when you look at this company, what they're proposing to set up here, you look at this company, which is called Amaila Hydro something. And who's putting up how much? This is the total thing here. 834.5 million US is the total investment. 834.5 million US. Of this amount, Site, we're told here, puts up 150 million US. 18% of the total. And they're up to 60% of the company. And the government and the taxpayers of this country, the consumers and all of that, who put up 82% of the total to get this thing going, end up with 40% of this company, a minority position. If anybody could explain that to me, I'll be quite happy to listen, provided I don't get too agitated. So this is it, 834.5 million US, Site gets 60%, Guyana government 40, Site puts up 150.3 million US, 18%, and they end up with 60% total control of this thing. There is a clause in this contract which says that when GPL wants to go to Amaila, they need to get permission from these people to go there. I don't know if you know that. I read it. You can't read it, you ain't got it. But if you got it, you could read it. Could you imagine that? This thing is routine. I wonder. The GPL has to give notice to Amaila if they want to go there and see this thing that cost us 680 million US to put into this thing. It says there. We have to get permission from these guys. So that'll be something. So we have a problem with the equity structure of this company. There's something wrong. There's something absolutely wrong. So I said they'll put up 150 million US. Do I believe them? Do you think I believe them? I don't believe them one bit, but that's what they say. In the beginning, we were told that this was a BOOT. There's something called a BOOT. Build, own, operate, and transfer deal. That the private sector will build the thing, own it, operate it, sell power for 20 years, and at the end of the 20 years, it will revert to the government of Guyana. This thing has changed. This thing has changed. This is not no BOOT. This is a joint venture where the people of this country are putting in 82 and getting 40, and they're putting in 18 and getting 60. This is no longer a BOOT operation. So all the talk about BOOT, I would say, is a confounded lie. It's not true. And then they talk a lot, the government people, about price volatility of fuel. You've heard that? The price volatility of fuel. Yeah. The fuel prices go up and down and all of that. The price volatility of fuel. This thing carries exchange rate risk for 20 years. This is a project that has to be serviced in US currency, all of it in US currency. And the product is being sold in Guyana dollars. If anybody could tell me what the rate of exchange of the Guyana dollar will be to the US in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years, I'll be happy to listen to that. But nobody knows that. But whatever is the exchange rate risk we run in there, real volatility, we will have to pay for it. It will be reflected in the tariff. Because the agreement says that the GPL shall adjust tariffs annually in order to accommodate the cost of this project. So that is the big risk we're running among other risks. So those are some of the problems. Then we come to the problem, you ever heard of a blackout? You ever blackout? You think Amaila won't give you blackout? Well, let me tell you about blackout. In this document, Amaila could give you blackout 6 different ways. Legally, contractually. The government signed to it. And I'll read them out to you quickly if you're interested. The first blackout Amaila could give you is no water. Inadequate flow of water. No water, no power, turn it off, blackout. Real blackout. Real blackout. There's no water. But I know you can't fix that. You know, something GPL get blackout, you get an engineer, you can fix something. But I don't fix the one. It's written here. It's written in black and white. That the whole question of flow of water, I think one of the MPs has raised it. In the next 20 years at Amaila and Kurabram, who knows what water will flow here? Anybody knows? There are big hydro in Venezuela, and there are big blackout there the other day, no water flowing. But they have acknowledged it in this document that GPL, Amaila, can give blackout. That's the verb they use here. Amaila give you blackout, no water, no flow, blackout, everybody. And this is big blackout, not just a little one, the whole thing. Then you have the next blackout called scheduled outage blackout. This whole system will shut down for 10 days. The whole thing, it's scheduled, they say. The whole thing, 10 days. They want to check what this guy's of water tunnel and all that nonsense. The whole thing shut down. That's, you call that scheduled. That's scheduled. So you're going to be a blackout there. They got, no, that total project blackout. This is number 3 blackout. Now you have force majeure blackout. You have emergency blackout number 5. And the last blackout is what they call in this document a forced blackout. So don't think you can't get blackout here. When this thing comes on stream, if it ever comes on stream, God forbid, you'll get real blackout from here. It's all contractual, it's acknowledged, it's legal, and they'll give you the blackout. They're shutting the whole place. And they'll tell you why. It's one of these 6 blackouts. This GPL, as presently configured, cannot handle this project to take power from Amaila, if Amaila were to be built. Because we're talking about an entirely inefficient system. With line losses, system losses, and it's a dilapidated system. Which, in all fairness to them, I would say they're trying to improve over time. And they're building some substations and so on. But if you were to take 1,000 gigawatt hours there, if that should ever happen, you won't be able to distribute and transmit it. You'll be buying 1,000 every 100 kilowatt hours you buy, you can only sell 68 at the present time, or 69. That's what you're going to do. We don't see any improvement in efficiencies by the time this thing is supposed to come on stream. GPL cannot handle this thing. But the contract requires GPL not to clean up its act, you know, to improve the entire transmission and distribution system. The contract requires GPL to fix the system of the grid at the point where you take the power. You gotta get that right. What you do with it after that, that's your business. But the contract obliges the GPL to make sure they get that right. The taking of the power and the metering of the power at the delivery point. What the GPL does with it after, well, that's their business. And that is why we say, no, this 1,000 gigawatt hours you're talking about. The way this thing is projected, it will do 1,000 gigawatt hours. The present demand here is about 750 gigawatt hours production, and they're actually billing about 500 gigawatt hours. There's a strong element of anticipation here that the big self-generators, the DDL and Banks TIH and the Darfur complex and all of them, they will come back in the grid. And that forms part of the assumptions of these projections. There is no justification for those assumptions. As far as I'm aware, those big self-generators ain't coming back on this grid. Right now, they generate their own power, they don't have blackout, all they need is the fuel to get anything going, and they're not going to come back on this system. Even with this hydro, because as the document says, you could still get blackout and plenty blackout. 6 different types of blackout. Companies like DDL and Banks TIH that need continuous electricity for their processes, for their production, ain't going to give up their system, which is continuous, uninterrupted power to go back to this thing that could give you 6 different types of blackout. So it is my considered opinion that the projections themselves are wrong for this project. The projections are wrong. Everything is wrong about this as far as I can tell. So if I were to sum up quickly before I go back to Mr. Ram, it has to do the 10 main points that we want to complain about, that we've spoken about, and fortunately some of it is captured in the document here. It has to do with the price of this thing, no competitive bidding, over 2.2 billion US over 10 years, the problem of GPL being able to handle this power, the inefficiency of GPL, the tariff structure, that GPL fixes its own tariff every year without any recourse to any regulator or regulatory system. The whole question of equity, who gets what with all this investment that the people of Guyana have put into this thing, 690 million US, and end up with 40%. And the exchange rate risk we're talking about. And now, this thing here will really, and these commitments that the government has taken on, and the people of this country, essentially the consumers and taxpayers, will burden this country for a long time to come. And I do believe we should do it. The total debt of this country right now, domestic and external, is running at about 1.7 billion odd. This thing is over 2.4 billion. It's more than the total debt of this country at the present time, domestic and external combined. And that is why they're looking to the National Assembly. You want me to talk about that? To raise the debt ceiling. There's something called a debt ceiling in this country. Debt ceiling is set by the Loans Act, I think, what is called the Loans Act, Chapter 7701 of the laws of Guyana, where there's a debt ceiling set, and therefore guarantees that the government makes. So because this thing is so enormous, they want to raise the debt ceiling. But two things about the raising of this debt ceiling. The first thing about the raising of this debt ceiling is that we're not being told who is contracting what debt and for what purpose. Because the way the Debt Ceiling Act is set up, 7701, the government guarantees debt for a public company. The GPL, as far as we can read here, is not borrowing any money. The GPL is entering into a power purchase agreement with Amaila to buy power. So it is not, strictly speaking, captured in 7701. 7701 talks about debt of a public company from a lending agency. It has to be a lending agency, Section 3. Only if a public company is borrowing from a lending agency that the government could stand behind them with a guarantee. 7701, Section 3. And as far as I'm aware anyhow, this whole idea of going to the National Assembly to raise the debt ceiling in connection with Amaila is misguided, because in the absence of any information as to who is borrowing what and under what terms that would trigger this thing. In any event, the more I look at the more we look at section the 7701, chapter 7701, what is it called here? The Guarantee of Loans Act. This act here in section 4 requires the Minister of Finance to lay before the National Assembly quarterly, the statement of guarantees that are already in place. He has failed to do that. He has failed to do it over the years. The minister is in breach of this act as far as we can tell. You have no evidence, we have seen no evidence that the minister has been complying with this act here in terms of laying before the National Assembly quarterly the statement of guarantees that are already in place. And therefore, I don't see how we can deal with him when it comes to these matters. He is in breach of the act. So I will start off with that. There are a couple more things we want to say. We're not, generally speaking, hydro is not a bad thing. Generally speaking, as a general rule, we have a lot of resources in this country and we ought to be able to do it. But this particular deal is bad. And I would never support it. And a lot of people believe that because you reject this thing, you reject hydro as a general proposition. We do not reject hydro as a general proposition, but this Amaila deal, we have to reject it for the couple reasons I've already stated, and we have many more reasons to elaborate, to use Bonham's word.
I think I just want to add a few matters. The government and its spokespersons, and I'm quite frankly, I'm a member of the public sector, I'm ashamed of this public sector we have in Guyana. They comment on documents that they have not seen. It's quite frankly disgraceful. I don't know which one of them would go to their board and say, look, we want this money, and I'm prepared.
Webster will do that.
Who is it? Webster, kid, go ahead.
Now, so clearly we have a problem, but let me tell you some of the critical documents that are not available and that prevent any serious discussion. Ramon Gaskin mentioned the disproportionate allocation, contribution versus allocation of Site Global and the government of Guyana. You put in 18% and you get 60%, and your company is somewhere out there. The government guarantees or injects 82% and gets 40%. Yet, these documents recognize the existence of a shareholders agreement, but there is no shareholders agreement in this. We don't know to what extent this government has sold out. In addition to that disproportion, what it has sold out. For example, we hear Site gets 19% return on capital absolutely tax-free. And if you read these documents, one said, oh, subject to the other one, the site will pay all its taxes. But when you look at the other one, it says site will pay no taxes in Guyana. We don't know whether in addition to, so the 19% completely free of tax, one can argue they will be carrying on trade or business in Guyana and therefore subject to corporation tax, and therefore you should be grossing up at a higher rate. But let us say you gross up just at 20% as withholding tax. They are free from withholding tax as well. Every single tax known in Guyana is excluded. What we don't know from the shareholders agreement is whether they will also get back their 150 million. Now, if they only get their 19% rate of return for their 150, and we believe that all of it is not coming in cash but in some sort of services, etc., they'll be taking out $570 million. $570 million. Of course, China Development Bank puts in 484 and take out over 500 million as well.
In interest.
In interest.
In interest.
In interest alone. All tax-free. So until we get, and when the government tells our politicians, but you have answers to all the questions. All I could have said on my column on Sunday, well, maybe the question was asked. But until we get a shareholders agreement, we really don't know what this thing is going to cost us. And anyone who tells us otherwise is doing a deal to share on us.
A total lie.
We don't have a copy of the agreement between the borrower, and we're not even sure who the borrower is, because it's compounded by this uncertainty over this piece of legislation, whether it's to guarantee the debt of another entity or whether the government of Guyana is borrowing. We don't know. What we do know, some of the penalties are charged at the prohibitive, extortionate rate of LIBOR plus 7%. Several of these, of the appendices to these documents, whether you call them schedules, etc., are not available in the document. And quite frankly, the document should have been immediately returned on delivery and said, look, give us a proper document, a complete document, and then we'll start from there. We don't have the project description, we don't have the EPA, that's Schedule 1, Schedule 2, we don't have Schedule 9, we don't have Schedule 10, we don't have operation and maintenance terms. None of these things is there. We don't even know, and I thought Ramon Gaskin would mention that one. What is the land description and maps?
No, there's no.
For this document, what this agreement calls for is for 42 miles. We know Guyanese, in complete breach of the Constitution, no Guyanese can go within 42 miles.
Of this thing.
It shall be for the exclusive use of siting and closed to public use.
That's correct.
The government has not. If you look in this document, it does not exist. It's a blank. So we have got no idea what it is. Is it a radius of 42 miles? That would make it over 5,000 square miles.
Yes.
That's serious business. But the Hydropower Act says, Section 5, says you can't lease. Yet CITE and the government of Guyana, we don't know who drew up the agreement, whether the Attorney General had a hand in it. We know Winston Brassington's initials. You know, Brassington's stamp is on everything. We know that they have signed to things that are unconstitutional and illegal. Since when a Guyanese can't go to a particular place?
The road.
And we don't know. So They are in breach of this act. Now, like Gaskin, Ram has been following. In fact, I checked we have 15 articles on our website on Amaila. We've been talking about this matter from the time it was first raised. Now, this act sets out how you deal with hydroelectricity or hydroelectric power. You get an interim license. It is subject to certain conditions. You meet those conditions. You write a report. It's vetted, and you get a final license. It provides for royalties and all of those things. Every single thing is waived. But more importantly, it says that in the documents for the final license, the company should have concluded all arrangements for the sale of hydroelectric power. Every single thing. Nothing has been done. So to a large extent, this document, apart from what Raymond Gaskin has said about the borrowing, and this piece of legislation that seemed to have been a cause of war recently, this is completely in breach of the legislation. Now, I belong to a profession, I'm newcomer to a profession. I don't know sometimes why they are not more active. But surely, if this government is mindful of the law, it will be mindful of the fact that if anyone takes this matter to court, I don't see any judge saying, no, we're not going to support your application. This thing is in breach of the law. So we've got a whole set of issues on legality. On the question of interest, I looked at a couple of sources. China Development Bank is a development bank. I saw on a website that they're being accused of being extortionate. But not only is there an 8.5% rate of interest, but there are lenders' fees and advisory costs of $33.3 million. And
US, right?
US, of course, we don't need US.
US.
Then there's debt risk insurance paid to a Chinese insurer. So Chinese lender, Chinese contractor, Chinese insurance company, $57 million.
US.
Now, just take those other costs, close to $200 million. Now, let's look at what happens in Ghana. A recent loan by the IDB to Guyana carries a rate of interest of 1% per annum during a grace period of 10 years and 2% per annum for 30 years. In other words, it's a 40-year. We are paying 8.5% plus all those prohibitive rates. The troubled Guyana Sugar Corporation borrows locally from the commercial banking system at interest rates ranging from 8%, less than what we are prepared to pay China Development Bank and take all the exchange risk. Those of you who have been following the press will have noted over the past few days, or past couple of months, the exchange rate has been moving unfavorably. Guyana bears the entire exchange risk on this transaction. Let me give you, so that's Daisuku. DDL, a commercial entity, has secured on its single largest loan, and you could go to its annual financial statements, audited financial statements, and see that they pay 3.88% per annum, and we are paying 8.5%, and paying for that, we pay somebody. We don't know who it is. Lots of people have been going to China recently, but we are paying lenders' fees and advisory costs, $33 million. So it's clear that something is wrong with the agreement. We mentioned the question of the access to the facility. We mentioned the missing documents. Now, the Attorney General is the chief legal advisor to this government. I am not sure that the Attorney General has been involved in this, the drawing up of these contracts. They say that these documents, there is no complete document, the license has not been complied with, and I would certainly hope. I don't like some of the sounds I'm hearing from the political parties. If the IDB say it's a go, we go. IDB is not going to look to see if the Guyanese consumer is getting shafted, if we get a disproportionate amount of control for what we put in. That's not going to interest the IDB. Ramon, Gaskin and I have written the IDB. We've asked for an audience. I've written the Prime Minister 3 letters. I've had a number of telephone calls from high political office. I said, well, Chris, why hope you can't support this? I said, well, you know, we have questions out there. He said, but send me questions now. I'll talk to so-and-so. We get no answer. So I'm hoping that the political parties who are talking about going along with what IDB says will consider the interests of the consumer in them. Our numbers are clear. Given what has got to be paid in terms of debt servicing for at least 12 years, because Society Global has said it's 114 million US per annum, increasing by 1.5 to 2% per annum. When you think what GPL has got to maintain, because of course certain areas of Guyana will not be supplied by Amaila source electricity, Bartica, Wakanam and all those places. It is clear from all the numbers, despite what every single politician is saying, despite what Ramesh Dupul, Ron Webster and the whole pack of them are saying, there is nothing to indicate, and we certainly don't have projections. What we have done, we've taken CITES numbers, we've taken 2012 audited financial statements of GPL. We've said even if you assume only 10 to 15% of generation costs. I see yesterday they said we will only save about 40% of generation costs, but that's because they're pulling numbers out of the air. They don't know what they're saying. If you do that, the only way rates can come down is if there is a significant injection of subsidy into the entity. Mr. Greenwich, we welcome you, sir. Would this be an agreement? Let me ask you a question, former Minister. Is this a kind of agreement that you would sign as Minister of Finance?
Without attempting to preempt the discussion, let me just say that the APNU has not at any point said that it will simply support this project once the IDB supports it. And there are a number of reasons for this which actually bear out the points that are being made here. As recently as yesterday, I made it very clear, and I want to make it very clear now, that the documentation before Parliament as regards Amaila hydroelectric project is not a full document in any sense of the word. There's a document called Amaila hydro or hydroelectric project, but it actually only has to do with the set-off. That is, the land that is to be set aside, equivalent to the reservoir. That's all it's about. The one that is called hydro, it is about a land set aside, forestry and wetlands. And the other project document, which Ramon mentioned, is actually not a project document at all, but the guarantee. And the guarantee, as I understand it, and the truth is that I can't perhaps be more definitive than you are as regards the guarantee, simply because in the 1-hour presentation that the Minister of Finance was kind enough to make, he spent, I think, we estimated 55 of those 60 minutes, costing out a certain greenage. Okay? We don't know why the ceiling was set where it was set. We simply know that that is what he was asking for, an increase from 1,000 to 150,000 billion. And the question as regards the bank is this. The IDB says that its client is SIFE. And since its client is SIFE, they are not in a position to answer a number of the financial questions that you asked and that we asked of them. And that is one of the reasons why we were not prepared, to embrace the project, and we continue to ask a number of questions. So I just wanted to clarify those dimensions, and given where we stand right now, we as the APNU, I don't want to attempt to speak for the AFC. The AFC made their position, and they can do so in future, have said that we are not in a position to lend our support to this project. And this, the same point being made, a hydro, an excellent idea, but a hydro that delivers power at the same prices and levels as thermal generators do now, that is the normal generating system, will not help us. We're seeking to put in place a generating system that delivers electricity at lower prices and more reliably. At this point in time, we are not yet there.
Mr. Gaskin, sir, based on your best calculations, what can you tell us now with respect to the estimated cost per kilowatt hour when Amaila will come in stream? What will cost John Public per kilowatt hour, both domestic and commercial?
I can tell you it will certainly be much more than what you're paying now. Because of the 2-point-something billion and the exchange rate is still running. It has to be. That I can say without any fear of contradiction. Absolutely. And not only is it a higher rate, there is no place you can go to challenge it, to have it adjudicated. GPL sets their own rates under the license they have, which guarantees them an 8% annual return on their investment too. And all that has to be factored in when they do rates. It will have to go up. Rates will have to go up in this country. There's no doubt about it. Because as I said earlier, when GPL buys the power, the switch, at the very switch, you're taking some proper blows. Because you can't deliver that power, you just take the switch. You lose it. As soon as you buy it, you lose it. You start losing it.
Yes, sir. Welcome to Guyana again.
Thank you. So you mentioned Government of Guyana's contribution. I think you said 680 million US or 690 million US. Professor Thomas has said that figure, or parties aware, we have not put a dollar value on our natural resources that are going to and from enclosed by this project. Does this 680 include that? And the second thing I want to say is, in a democracy, for such a large project, you would have, a government would issue a green paper that would set out the pros and cons for a large infrastructure project that would have tax implications and loan implications and debt implications for a long time. And that could be then, the green paper would set out answers to all the questions in a question and answer period, go to natural resources and other sectoral committees, and also include public consultations. So my question is, because of all of these troubling issues raised by Amaila, should we not be asking of the Speaker of the House such a green paper to be tabled?
Yes, I agree with you. Maybe the MP in the House today will raise that. As far as the 680, you're quite right. There's absolutely no cost, not even actual or imputed. Although the Hydroelectric Power Act speaks of royalty, everything is paid. But I should say, because we want to be complete, the 680 includes guarantees by the government of Guyana, because if there's any default, the government is bearing that. So it is the government that carries the risk on those sums.
If I might just say, the question of the green paper is really not one for the Speaker. It is for the political parties. They have to decide to ask for such a paper and see whether they can force the government to deliver one. But normally the green paper would precede the presentation of the two bills that are there for the support of the parties.
I want to say that the two little matters have been brought before the National Assembly which have to do with Amaila. The guarantee of loans thing, the debt ceiling thing, and the hydropower. But the project itself has not been brought to the National Assembly for debate and approval. You're trying to debate these little consequential things without approving the project. The project itself has not been approved. It has not been brought to the House for approval. And one of the problems is that once you approve any of these things here, impliedly you will have been approving the project itself. And they're putting the cat before the horse, the cat before the jackass. And therefore, they should bring the project to the National Assembly. This thing requires public hearings throughout this country. Throughout this country, you're talking about 840 million US plus another 1.4 billion US before it comes there, to let the people know what is the implication of to take on this kind of burden. This is more than the total debt of this country in one project, which we're told may fail because you don't have water. They tell you that in the document here. So the whole idea of these two little things, the guarantee loans amendment and the hydropower should be rejected out of hand totally, absolutely, before the project itself is brought to the National Assembly for approval after consultations with the people of this country. You're talking big bucks. You're talking big bucks. And I'm not sure if IDB is lending a site there. I'm not sure about that. If IDB is in the basis of lending a private company money, but that is possible. I don't know.
Yes, they can lend as the World Bank does through the IFC.
They have a window. They have some private sector window there.
Site is the client.
Well, CITES said they had money to invest in this thing. So if they borrow from IDB at 2% and we give them 19% guaranteed, untaxed, you can see what they're doing there. It's all bad news. But we should not deal with these two things before the National Assembly, because we haven't looked at the project yet in its entirety to see whether we approve it.
But you can't have such a document because there is no feasibility study. There was no feasibility study.
And that is why we should reject the whole thing. Reject the whole thing, all of it. Reject all of it until such time as we can properly and intelligently look at it. All of it.
I was wondering if you could address the issue of the license and if there's anything that precludes a transfer, because the license was originally handed to Motilal and he sold it to site for government in the US. And also, could you say in the tariff, the projection tariff, in putting together the calculation, how much is it going to cost to keep GPL up and running? Because it would have to be.
I'm glad you mentioned that. How much it costs to keep GPL running? They better have the water on standby for this 6 blackouts where they can give you. And they better have the people available to get it started. Because you get plenty blackwood from the people. You're going to have it ready. You're going to have to have all this fossil fuels that you don't want. You're going to have all of it ready, but you're going to have to use it. This thing said there was a total shutdown of the entire system for 10 days while they're checking some water tunnel. You know the water tunnel?
To respond to your question, in fact, as you know, unprecedentedly, Fifth Motilal was allowed 11 extensions of the interim license. 11. And then he turned around and sold it. We have absolutely no idea whether the government or Prime Minister Sam Hines, the relevant minister, gave that approval. What we do know is that it will be considered, those sums will be considered as part of the cost on which the rate has got to be calculated. It also has to consider all the legal fees by CITES, the consultants, for drawing up these documents, which essentially vouchers, which mean in many cases that we've given up our jurisdiction in favor of New York, where CITES headquarters is based for the arbitration. The accounting is in US dollars, so everything is weighed against us. And all these costs will factor in, and this is why, Dennis, we are saying there is nothing at this stage, and Mr. Greenwich points out that he has seen no study. Yet we hear Mr. Irfan Ali saying there's a 25% reduction. It's a gap, or 20% reduction. There is nothing to support such statements.
Could you say the financing structure is unique to Amaila Falls, or if let's say the Seattle factory had a similar arrangement in terms of the actual cost of construction as it is financing cost. The risk insurance and that.
Yes, it was, in terms of the project, it was essentially, well, it was some self-generated funds from Gaisuko, but it was borrowed.
No, nothing but says say the level of political risk insurance and that.
No, we know of no such thing. We know of no, not even with Amaila, not even with the Kingston Hotel or CGIA, that there is such exorbitant and prohibitive costs. You have a high interest rate. Now, the economists in the room will tell us, your interest rate reflects your risk. You have a high interest rate, and yet you have massive political insurance. And again, in these agreements, if you see political force, they have this concept of political force majeure. So you guys better behave yourself. Because if anything happens, you've got to pay for the cost. They have practically thought of everything. I just want to make one final point before we hand it going back to you. This whole business has been put, no, I think Ramon said the cart before the horse. We need to go right back. Let's check this agreement, and perhaps we can introduce where we think we ought to go. We think this project, as is, and I had one of my colleagues in Ramon Pray look at this document. Once we get into this, you can't get out of it. You pay almost more than twice to get out of it. You've got to pay the government capital back to siting, as we see it. It is unfathomable. And this is why we said you need that shareholders agreement. But it would be insane to get into this agreement because, believe me, you have shut yourself out from practically any other source of electricity for some time, or any other arrangement. And you have tied yourself up into a financial arrangement that is so prohibitively expensive that you say, I might as well bear it because I can't get out of it. You pay over twice the investment. And that's because they're saying, we have a good deal here. We got 19%, we borrowing maybe a 2% from IDB, we don't know. Getting 19% return. So we will extract every single penny out as well. Yes, ma'am?
And for the 2 miles that you're saying that could possibly be in radius, if it's in radius, does that mean that it's going to infringe on the protected areas?
Well, let me see if I could answer that. There's something I could answer. I've been thinking about it too, because the thing came to the National Assembly for the amendment without the facts. How many square miles are we talking about? The members of the National Assembly and the public are being shut out of the facts on this deal up to today. We're not getting the facts on this deal, but what we do know is that this document says that on the road for 42 miles approaching Currabram, the public will not be allowed to traverse the road. Well, of course, against the Constitution 149 and all that. We don't know if that is the radius of this thing, this 42 miles, that you won't be able to go on this road that the people of this country paid to build. But that's what the contract, you would not be, you'll be prohibited from using this road. The public will be prohibited. 42 miles on the road to Currabram. We don't know if that's the radius, but if it is, you talk about 5,000 square miles in the whole area, but they did not mention it when they came to the National Assembly last week for approval of this amendment to the Hydropower Act to create the offset reserve. They didn't tell you. And they're not telling you these things. You're not getting the facts. If the little facts they didn't give you are capable of agitating me so much, can you imagine when I get the full story?